Best of luck in your future endeavours. It's the I hope this email finds you well, or please pass on my regards of you're fired. No one has ever been found well by an email or passed on their regards, so what do you think they really think about your future endeavours? Long story short, they wish you ill. Or at least they couldn't give a Fosbury flop about them. And WWE has made such a habit of doling out the platitude in recent years that future endeavouring has become a verb. So if it's expected that WWE always endeavour to future endeavour, how can we be shocked when in future endeavours are dispensed? But that's what this list is out to prove though, because I am Laurie hailing from partsFUNknown, and these are the 10 most shocking WWE firings ever. Hey! Before we get on with the video though, why not shock us and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, because we are tantalizingly close to 200,000 subscribers and we would love you to help us get there. It really does help us keep this channel up and running. Anywho, onwards with the list. Shane McMahon. The sweat-dripping, crepe-repping, potato-farming inspiration for this list kicks us off after Vince McMahon gave his mini-me a taste of the laser beam earlier this year. Nepotism be damned. Shane McMahon returning to WWE in 2016 felt like a pretty big deal. Coming back after 7 years in exile and initially winning over the crowd by putting his body through increasingly violent tumbles. But that is the sort of thing with a short-ish shelf life and a serious risk of shortening your own life. So beyond death-defying leaps, what else did Shane actually have to offer to WWE? Because fans grew tired of his float like a butterfly, sting like an actual punch to the face way of shadowboxing, and the frankly profound amount of liquid that escaped his body on a nightly basis. Things came to a head though when Shane O'Mac came back at the Royal Rumble 2022 after being absent since WrestleMania the year before. He reportedly caused such a ruckus backstage trying to book the entire Rumble around himself that Vince McMahon handed his own son a pink slip. Now we just need to wait for Shane, Triple H and Cody to come together to create NX3 and create the ultimate timeline. Braun Strowman. Now, if you were to weird science the perfect wrestling big man from a computer to appease Vince McMahon, it would probably be Braun Strowman. He's part farmhand, part lumberjack, part Thomas the Tank Engine. The monster among men was essentially the sort of sports entertainment spectacle that Vince really values. And Brawny the Strowman overachieved in WWE because of that, especially when you consider the quality of his work when he debuted as a massive cult member alongside Bray Wyatt. On the main roster, Braun got himself over by tipping over increasingly large objects and even had a run as the Universal Champion. He seemed like an easy choice for a WWE lifer. Huge, muscular, could have a decent match for the size of him. He did a choo-choo thing that went around the ring with sound effects. Vince loves that, which made it even more shocking when WWE announced his release on June 2nd, 2021. How could this happen? Why would Vince McMahon throw out the perfect big man? What's that? 7-figure contract. Right, groovy, smashing, yeah, capitalism, yeah. Mr. Kennedy. When you look back on it with hindsight, Mr. Kennedy might not have been as shocking a firing as some of the others on this list. He seemed to always be injured from 2007 onward, was involved in WWE's 2007 steroid scandal and all, and had heat with the wrongest of wrong people. I mean, when you end up on the bad side of Randy Orton and John Cena, you were probably not long for the WWE world. That's just basic bloody logic. However, what was shocking about this, especially at the time, was that Kennedy was fired after returning for one show following being off TV for 10 months with an injury. So he returned on that one episode of Raw where Vince McMahon threw a tantrum over having to relocate the show because of a basketball game and dressed up his top baby faces as the LA Lakers and his top heels as the Denver Nuggets. Kennedy dropped Orton high on his shoulders and neck on a bad suplex and was just never seen again. For someone who was going to be given the ball multiple times in WWE, Kennedy's firing was the final in a long line of WWE air balls. Get it? Because basketball. Yeah. Daniel Bryan. Once upon a time, before the Yes Chants, WrestleMania miracles, and some of the best work WWE has ever put on screen, 2010 hardcore indie wrestling fans thought they had seen the end of Daniel Bryan's WWE run before it had even begun. Because Bryan was established to the hardcore audience as perhaps the greatest independent wrestler of all time, but to WWE, he was one of the many geeks carrying kegs and climbing monkey bars on NXT Negative 1.0. Finally, Bryan appears as part of the Nexus and destroys Raw, where he commits enough cardinal sins in one segment to get himself canned. He choked Justin Roberts with his tie. Sponsors didn't like that. He spat on John Cena. Sponsors also didn't like that, despite the fact that Cena always has a tiny towel to hand. A simple conversation outlining what not to do in future might have been enough for most companies, but there was enough pushback from sponsors here to see Bryan fired. He wasn't sad though. He told John Laurinaitis that he was about to make more money than he'd ever made by returning to the indies. But for the most talented member of this new faction to be fired on night one, needless to say, say that came as a shock, especially as in storyline he was kicked out of the Nexus for showing remorse and said to never be returning to WWE again. He was back within 2 months. Matt Hardy. Poor Matt Hardy. Matt actually has the honor of being fired by WWE more than once. However, in 2010 he was very much angling for his release, and considering his extremely mid-card treatment at the time, it wasn't exactly surprising to see him go. But in 2005, however, Matt found out that one of his best friends was shacking up with his girlfriend while he was at home injured, and how do you really handle a situation like that? I mean, through great emotional strife, Matt took the news to the internet, which WWE decided was the wrong thing to do, and then they fired him. He wasn't pleased about the news at all, calling into WWE's Bite This web show and saying WWE endorsing Edge and Lita's adultery was horse. Talk about a rough few months for Matt Hardy. I mean, the entire situation was just incredibly shocking for fans, getting a very real and very messy look behind the scenes, which we just weren't used to at the time. Though Matt was quick to be rehired and thrown into a work-shoot rivalry with Edge, but this whole situation was TMZ-rific and proved Shock TV can indeed be shocking on occasion. Kurt Angle. It is hard to find a more competent top star in the early 2000s WWE than everyone's favourite balding milkman. No, not me, lad. Kurt Angle. Angle was consistently in the top tier of in-ring performers, promos, and just all-round entertainers during his first 7 years with WWE. He was a multiple-time world champion, had main evented WrestleMania. He somehow pulled off this tiny cowboy hat. The man had done it all. However, by the time 2006 rolled around, Angle's health was deteriorating, and admittedly, his attitude to WWE had somewhat soured. Angle was then released in August, and he would later show up in TNA, where he would spend most of the next decade. But this was a massive blow to WWE's roster that was now rapidly losing some of their best workers in a very short space of time. For many, Angle was their favourite wrestler, and the shock of his departure was just another contributing factor to WWE's steady drop in popularity during these years. Chyna. I mean, sometimes it feels like everyone in the Attitude Era is looked at as a bigger star than they actually were. I mean, how big of a deal were Kai and Tai, really? However, this cannot be said for Chyna, one of WWE's most unique and popular women's stars ever. And by 2001, Chyna was no longer wrestling men and had beaten Ivory for the WWF Women's Championship at WrestleMania X7 to culminate a long-running storyline. What happens next gets tricky, but all sides of the story still lead to Chyna being gone from WWE by the end of 2001. During this time, Chyna was dating Triple H, who also started dating Stephanie McMahon at the same time. Well, like, maybe you should not do that. There have been varying accounts of how much this actually played into her departure, but I mean, being the cheated-on ex-girlfriend of your boss's prospective son-in-law couldn't have been a positive in this instance. Other sides have said that Chyna left to pursue acting, while others stated her split from the company was over money, with her sister and Jim Ross both stating that Chyna had said she wouldn't re-sign for less than $1 million salary. The truth is probably a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B, but as WWE transitioned out of the Attitude Era, one of the biggest stars of that era was shown the door. Bray Wyatt. There don't appear to be many more creative minds in wrestling than Wyndham Rotunda, better known to the WWE world as Husky Harris. Oh, and also Bray Wyatt. Wyatt's time in WWE must have been frustrating because his character was fumbled worse than going to second base at Bible camp. From the awesome cult leader gimmick being hocused and pocused into oblivion to endless bad feuds, and then finally the mishandling of the Fiend character, it seemed like WWE was actively punishing Wyatt for coming up with ideas. Then, after being taken off TV following a dreadful WrestleMania return at WrestleMania 37, WWE just fired him out of the blue for not being happy about the creative. Well, jolly gee willikers, I can't possibly imagine why. I mean, Wyatt was a proven merchandise mover, a creative mind, a great worker, and a former world champion, and also one of the most bafflingly mishandled performers to come through WWE's doors since maybe ever. It's probably that didn't make him very happy. Or the attitude problem. Hulk Hogan. For God's sake. It's not easy to talk about, is it? Anyway, Hulk Hogan was the Western world's face of pro wrestling since the birth of Hulkamania, and despite his multiple retirements, runs in WCW and TNA, it seemed like his often controversial but mostly popular legacy was absolutely bulletproof. And then Hogan tested the theory by unloading a dozen clips on his legacy with vociferous fury. In 2015, Hogan was shown to have made incredibly racist comments, the kind that leave a stain on your legacy that just never washes away, nor should it. Hogan had been back with WWE on a Legends deal for over a year at the time, but there was nothing that could keep him from being fired in this moment. I mean, the firing itself wasn't shocking at all after you heard what he'd been saying and heard the tapes. I mean, what else were WWE going to do? But the whole situation was pretty shocking to find out that the squeaky clean, eat your vitamins Hogan had it in him. Hogan has been brought back into the fold since his firing though, because what is accountability in the face of cold hard cash? Everyone else in 2020 and 2021. I mean, how could you narrow this list down to just 10? In past years, there may have been some spring cleaning releases done after WrestleMania at WWE, a Mike Knox released here, a Damien Sandow there, but nothing could ever compare to the sheer onslaught of releases that WWE have hit us with over the last 2 years. As everyone knows by now, we've been going through this thing known as the pandemic, and WWE decided to part ways with everyone from Rusev to Zack Ryder to the Good Brothers and Deonna Purrazzo as that happened. Then they just didn't stop, and they just continued to release talent at a whirlwind pace. There isn't even enough time to give each of the biggest stars their due in this video. I mean, how do you release Aleister Black, Hit Row, Ember Moon, Ruby Riott, or we cannot and will not ever be able to stress this enough, how do you release Keith Lee? WWE has become synonymous with releases over the last 2 years, and honestly, we might as well just hope that they don't fire Randy Orton or something before this list goes out. I mean, there's 5 days between me recording this and it going out, so cool it. I'm watching you, but I'm not watching because I don't like Raw. And that's our list. Which release shocked you the most at the time? Are there any others that made you sit up and pay attention that we didn't mention? Let us know in the comments down below. And why not click the videos that have appeared on screen now for more PFK goodness? See you later. Jam that jam.